This movie is really weird, but also really sad, and also can be interpreted in a couple different ways. Let's do it. Horse Girl is about this young girl named Sarah who is just really lonely and introverted and a little bit awkward. Sarah works in a fabric store with this woman named Joan, and she also has this roommate named Nikki. Nikki and her boyfriend Brian come home one day to find that Sarah is alone on her birthday, so they decide to invite over Brian's roommate Darren for a party. And even though Sarah again is a little bit awkward, she and Darren hit it off, but they're interrupted when she randomly gets a nosebleed. And that night, Sarah has this weird dream where she is lying on a table in a white room and there's a man and a woman unconscious lying next to her. The next morning, Nikki finds Sarah passed out on the living room floor and there's scratches all over the wall, which Nikki and Sarah both chalk up to the fact that Sarah was drinking. Sarah goes to work where she has another nosebleed, and then she watches this guy walk by outside and recognizes him as the man that was lying on that table in her dream the night before. Throughout this, we find out that Sarah is a horse girl, hence the title, and she's constantly going to her old stable that she used to ride at to hang out with her old horse, Willow. She also hangs out with her childhood friend, Heather, who actually had a traumatic brain injury after a riding accident. After she leaves Heather, Sarah is driving home and she's at the red light in front of a water facility when suddenly she blinks and she's standing in her kitchen. She's missing time. She then hears a woman speaking in the next room who she assumes to be Nikki, but then she finds out that Nikki wasn't home. Sarah then goes to the garage to get her car and she finds that it's been stolen, and she gets a call from her stepfather, Gary, and he has been called saying that her car is in a tow yard. We find out that Sarah's mother battled with depression and committed suicide recently, so Gary is kind of her only parent and really the only family she has. He brings her to the tow yard to pick up her car, and she's informed that her car was abandoned in the middle of a road in front of a water facility. We also have seen that Sarah is a frequent sleepwalker, and that night she sleepwalks out of her apartment and ends up outside at this telephone booth. She locks herself out, but when Nikki lets her back in, she sees that only a minute has passed since she fell asleep. Sarah goes to see a doctor for her nosebleeds, and she also asks him about how to test if she's a clone, because she is absolutely convinced that she is a clone of her deceased grandmother who looks exactly like her. And she also believes that she's being abducted by aliens, and that's why she's having these weird dreams and these problems with time. But of course, the doctor doesn't believe her and just encourages her to talk to a psychologist. Meanwhile, Sarah again sees that guy from her dream, and it turns out his name is Ron, and he owns a hardware store, and she follows him in there one day, and he's just very confused. He obviously has no idea who she is. Sarah is still trying to maintain somewhat of a normal life, and she ends up going on a date with that guy Darren, but the moment that he expresses that he believes in the supernatural or paranormal, Sarah just takes it a little too far. She makes Darren drive her to the cemetery where she tells him that they need to dig up her dead mother so that they can take her mother's DNA to prove that she's a clone. Darren tries to calm her down and bring her home, but this just makes her think that Darren is part of this plot against her, and she threatens him and makes him leave. Later that night, Sarah is in the shower, but when she steps out of the shower through the door, she actually steps through the door of her place of employment completely naked in front of the whole store. Her coworker Joan sees Sarah and kicks everybody out of the store and comforts her, tries to calm her down. But Sarah is rambling on about being a clone and being abducted by aliens, and at one point the phone rings and Sarah answers it, and she can hear what Joan is going to say before she says it, and she tells Joan, "I can hear the future." So at this point, Sarah is admitted to a psychiatric facility, and it's really sad because you can tell that she knows that this is crazy, but it feels very real to her and she can't help it. Sarah meets with the psychiatrist who insists that he knows her and that she's been here before, even though she has no memory of that. And that night, one of the nurses leaves Sarah's bedroom door open and she escapes the hospital, and I actually don't think she escapes the hospital. I think this is just a really elaborate dream sequence. She goes to the craft store and steals a bunch of fabric that she uses to make matching outfits for herself and her horse Willow. She goes to visit Darren at his apartment and the two of them sleep together. And after that, Sarah lays a piece of fabric down on the carpet and cuts into it and creates a doorway which she goes through. Through that doorway, she enters that white room that she had seen in her dream, and she sees those two unconscious people again, the man and the woman. And this time she sees these shadowy figures above them, seemingly operating on them. Sarah leaves this room through a window, but that window then brings her into her friend Heather's room where she's asleep, and she gets into bed with Heather and lays down with her and falls asleep herself. But when she wakes up, she's back in the hospital. And she wakes up in her roommate's bed, and it's at this point that she discovers that her roommate is the girl that she's been seeing in her dreams unconscious. So this girl wakes up, and Sarah asks her why she's in the hospital, and this girl explains to Sarah that she swears that she went to bed in like 1995 and she woke up and she's in the future and everything's different and she doesn't remember anything. So Sarah tells this girl that she believes her because she believes they're experiencing the same thing and they're both being abducted by aliens, which which at first this woman doesn't believe, but then Sarah starts describing stuff from her dreams that she could only possibly know if she had the same dreams. So Sarah ends up telling her psychiatrist that she and her roommate are experiencing the same thing, and this is basically confirmation that she is being abducted by aliens. Now at this point, the psychiatrist has gone back on what he said and said that this is Sarah's first time here, she's never been here before. So at this point, honestly, you feel like you're going insane with Sarah because you don't know what's real and what's not. But despite the fact that the psychiatrist is still concerned about Sarah because she's obviously still delusional, she is discharged because she's been there for 72 hours. So Sarah goes home and we see her looking at a picture of her grandmother, who is Sarah. She looks exactly like Sarah. And Sarah puts on her grandmother's dress, does her hair and makeup exactly like she has in that photo, and she goes to the stable where Willow is. Sarah proceeds to steal Willow out of the stable and walk Willow into the woods with her. Sarah then lies on the ground in the woods as a spaceship appears above her and abducts her and literally just like lifts her off into the air, and the movie ends. So this movie can obviously be interpreted in two ways. Either Sarah is schizophrenic and she's having a mental breakdown, or she's actually being abducted by aliens. I always thought this movie was about Sarah's struggle with mental illness. Her mother was severely depressed. Earlier, she had told the psychiatrist that her grandmother also had schizophrenia and ended up dying homeless on the street. So I do think that her mental illness is genetic, and that's what's happening to Sarah. However, there is one element of this movie that makes me believe that maybe the alien abduction part is true. That's the fact that when we first see Sarah and her coworker Joan in the opening scene, we see Joan look out the window and she sees a brown horse in the parking lot. And at the end, when Sarah is walking Willow to the woods, they walk through a parking lot, and in the window behind them, we can see Joan and Sarah. And Joan obviously sees this horse, and we have no reason not to trust her. Like, she's a reliable witness. She doesn't seem to be struggling from any mental health conditions. So if Joan saw this horse, which really was in the future, then that kind of shows that Sarah's reality is not entirely warped. I don't know. I really go back and forth on this one, especially for that reason, and also because of the way that Sarah knew about that girl's dreams. Even though that girl could have just fully been a figment of her imagination, but like, we know that Joan exists, so what is up with that? I don't know. Let me know what you think. But I like this movie because it's ambiguous and because you can have conversations on theories about it.